Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So as you know, Thursday means Tier Thursday here in Instant Deck Tech land, and this week we are heading to Modern to look at one of my most hated decks. If I was to rank my most hated decks in Modern, we would have Boggles as like 1A, and then 1B would be Naya Burn decks. I just do not... Oh man, they kill me so much. They take away all my fun. Anyway, Naya Burn is a tier 1 archetype, and it is a very powerful deck in Modern, so I figured it would be a good idea to take a look and see how it actually works. This exact version took 5-0 in a Magic Online League by Nishi Girard, so congrats to Girard on their finish with the deck. However, it's pretty stock. Naya Burn decks, the tier versions of Burn in Modern, play, 75 cards in common. It is very set in stone. There's very few flex slots. So even though this is Gerard's version, if you run into a tier version of a Burn deck, it is most likely going to have almost all the same cards as you see in this deck. So a quick reminder before we break it all down, if you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So the theory of Burn is you want to resolve about 6 spells. That is idea. The deck, how it's constructed with 20 lands in all these spells that deal between 3 and maybe 4 to 6 damage, somewhere in that range. You need to resolve 6 spells, and you're going to 20 your opponent and win the game, especially taking into consideration fetch lands and stuff like this, which means that every turn you're drawing maybe 2 damage worth of spells. So that's kind of how the deck is constructed, to be really redundant and make sure that every draw step you're just drawing more damage, and being able to kill your opponent, usually by turn 4, and very consistently as well, assuming your opponent doesn't have any crazy disruption. So it starts off with some aggressive 1-drops. Goblin Guide and Monastery Swiftspear are just staples in Burn strategies. They are typically attacking for 2 pretty much every turn. Goblin Guide literally attacks for 2 on turn 1 with haste. Monastery Swiftspear sometimes attacks for 1, often attacks for 2, and occasionally even attacks for 3 because of the prowess. Also has haste, so it gets in on turn 1. So these cards typically represent maybe 4 damage over the course of the game, because you play Goblin Guide, get a hit, hopefully get in a second hit. Then if your Goblin Guide dies, you don't even really care. Like, yes, you would rather have it keep dealing damage, but if you can get in 4 damage with these cards, they have done their job. You have started down that path to resolving the number of spells necessary to win. Wild Mikado is one of the 3 main deck cards that pushes this deck into the Naya colors. So the deck is really a mono red deck that splashes green and white for 3 cards. One is Nikado, which is just huge on turn 1. It's a 3/3 for 1. If you can get in 1 hit with it, that's 3 damage. It's the same as a lightning bolt to the opponent's face. If you get in 2 hits, that's 6 damage, and that's just absolutely insane. As far as the rest of the creatures, Grim Lavamancer is maybe the only flex slot. It takes advantage of all the burn spells and fetch lands that go in your graveyard, can kill troubling creatures, but some decks have it, some decks don't. However, Eidolon of the Great Revels is a staple. It is super good. It gives the deck game against any sort of combo deck. You have someone's going Thing in the Ice, Manamorphose, Gitaxian Probe, trying to flip it. It makes it really hard for those decks, because whenever the opponent's casting a spell, because most spells cost 3 or less in Modern, they're taking 2 damage, so it's really hard for combo decks to kill you through an Eidolon. Plus, just the damage is nice. You play it on turn 2, your opponent wants to path it, they gotta take 2 damage. Your opponent wants to cast a Wall of Omens or a Death Shadow or whatever they happen to be playing, they gotta take 2 damage. Yes, you're gonna take a bit of damage too from your burn spells, but since you have so many spells that are dealing direct damage to your opponent, you don't really care. You're breaking the symmetry of Eidolon of the Great Revels, and it is super important to the deck. As far as the rest of the deck, the other 2 cards that make the deck splash into green and white are Boros Charm and Atarka's Command, and each of these cards are super powerful. So Boros Charm, 4 damage for 2 mana, super great rate. That's about as efficient as it gets for Burn. Plus it can occasionally deal 6 damage if you attack with a Wild Mikado. You can target it with the double strike effect. Normally you only want to do this if you feel really safe. You don't want to risk it for that 2 extra damage, but if your opponent's tapped out, they're not blocking, It's kind of safe to get in that 2 extra damage. Can randomly save your stuff too from a Wrath, kind of the least used mode. I hardly ever see Burn players use the indestructible mode. Atarka's Command, 90% of the time what you're doing is giving all your creatures +1/+1. So your Goblin Guy becomes 3/3, Nakado's 4/4. Your Swift Spear also becomes a 3/3 because it triggers Prowess as well. So it pumps up all your creatures, and then you're dealing 3 damage to your opponent's face. And it doesn't target, so it gets around Leyline of Sanctity, which is really sweet. But it often represents maybe 6 to 7 damage for 2 mana when you consider the creatures attacking as well. Plus, it's a main deck hedge against life gain. We talked about how the deck is drawing like 2 points of damage a turn. So if your opponent can play an Obstinate Baloth and gain 4 life, that's 2 extra turns of draw steps that you need to make up for that life gain, or a timely reinforcement, things like that. Atarka's Command lets you shut down that life gain, which also ends up representing like 7 points of damage. If you can fizzle 4 points of life gain with your opponents can't gain life mode plus deal 3 damage, that's a huge swing in life and makes the card very worthy of main deck inclusion. The rest of the deck is Lightning Bolts. 3 damage to the opponent for as cheap as possible. It only gets 4 literal Lightning Bolts in Lightning Bolt itself, 3 damage to a creature or player, the best burn spell ever printed, but it has a lot of slightly worse Lightning Bolts that are still good enough. Rift Bolt is a literal Lightning Bolt if you suspend it for 1 turn. Lava Spike is a Lightning Bolt, but it can only hit your opponent's face, and Searing Blaze is an expensive Lightning Bolt that requires landfall to really work, but it has the upside of taking out a creature along the way. So if you get in the early damage with your creatures, you use Boros Charm and Atarka's Command as kind of your big finishers for these huge chunks of damage, then the rest of the game you're just throwing Lightning Bolts at your opponent's face, trying to get their life total down to 0. And the neat thing about Burn is it's one of the few decks in all of Magic where it is often correct to just turn 1, play a mountain, lightning bolt your opponent's face. Most of the time you're taught to hold on to that bolt. What if your opponent plays a creature you gotta kill? You don't want to waste your lightning bolt. It's not the best way to play. In this deck, it often is correct to just throw those burn spells at your opponent's face, try to kill them as quick as possible. Really, the only time you want to be throwing them at creatures is when you absolutely have to. When a creature's gonna kill you or gain a ton of life or something. In those cases, it's okay to kill a creature, but most of the time you're just throwing these spells at your opponent's face. The deck has a bunch of fetch lands, pumps up Grim Lavamancer, a bunch of other dual lands, a few mountains. In the sideboard, Skullcrack. If your opponent's bringing in life gain, you bring in more Skullcracks. You get 8 essentially with Atarka's Command to fizzle that damage. Destructive Revelry destroys Ley Lines of Sanctity, Ensnaring Bridges, affinity cards, and it does some damage along the way. Deflecting Palm is awesome against big creatures. Your opponent attacks with an Emrakul, you Deflecting Palm it, that 15 damage goes at your opponent's face instead of at you and kills them. Grim Lavamancer for creature matchups, Path to Exile also for creature matchups to get rid of Tarmogoyfs and stuff clogging up the ground. And that is Naya Burn for Modern, and that's been our Instant Deck Tech for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon.